So this is the governor, and part of the reason that we fled Los Angeles and California. And he's back at it in his 2028 presidential run, early moments of it, no doubt. And he is trying to ingratiate himself and get his name known as somebody who can see both sides of the issues by interviewing conservatives and having a cross dialogue between somebody who's a supreme far leftist, as he's managed his state into the ground, and somebody like Charlie Kirk, who he interviewed on his first, and now Steve Bannon. So I'm endlessly fascinated with the machinations here and the debate. Steve Bannon I find to be very hard-hitting. I don't find him to be incredibly likable, but I find him to be incredibly intelligent. So I really want to see how this conversation goes, and I thought that I would bring you along for the ride.
And here we go.
It's impossible not to note the world that we're living in relationship to everything happening with the markets, everything happening with the with tariffs, everything happening with CR and a potential government shutdown.
Don't be giving tariffs stink eye. I don't want to start off with you giving it stink eye already.
We'll stress.
I'm a tariff guy. I'm a tariff guy.
I appreciate that, and we'll see. We'll stress test.
The purpose I want to do this is I want to convert you to be a tariff guy also. This is part of the process to unwind you from being a globalist to make you a populist nationalist. It's a long journey. It's a long journey. It's a long journey, but I think you'll get there.
This is part of the deprogramming, is it? I appreciate it. And by the way, for the record, I'm going down your rabbit hole right here. I'm not an absolutist as it relates to being against tariffs by any stretch of the imagination. And I thought it interesting I will
say whatever it takes for me to get elected. That's what he's saying.
What I think Biden tripled tariffs on aluminum and steel, which is getting a lot of attention in this country today as it relates to Canada. And Democrats weren't screaming and yelling about that. So
Fetterman, look, you've got, and by the way, thanks, Governor, for doing this. I really appreciate it. Wanted to have this conversation for a long time. Two of the three best economic populists in the Democratic Party, who I think are kind of on an island, one of the best is Ro Khanna. Ro's economic patriotism, which we always kid him as just ripping off Navarre and my economic nationalism, is he's an economic populist. So is Fetterman. Fetterman just announced, we're here today during the CR. Fetterman just announced he would support the CR if it came in as Fetterman's a populist. And then Sherrod Brown. Sherrod Brown, I think, has been an economic populist for a long time. So there are.
Sherrod Brown got voted out of his Senate seat in favor of Bernie Moreno. I'm not sure what Steve Bannon is saying there. Sherrod Brown has no more influence.
Very strong voices in the Democratic Party, I think. Now, unfortunately, as a populist, I think they're kind of on an island because it really hasn't been the center of the conversation with the Democratic Party. But I think those three are pretty good as far as populism goes.
And Steve, in terms of populism, then it's a good segue. How do you define that then? Is it a principle? Right, obviously tariff may be a component part, but how do you define populism, particularly in relationship to their reflective lens in terms of them being
populism? Obviously, we believe in subsidiarity. We believe in bringing power back to the grassroots level, right? We're very anti-elitist, and one of the reasons is we think the elites in this country, the highly educated elites, the political class, the Wall Street, Silicon Valley, Hollywood, all of it, have really forgotten the underlying kind of principles of the country and kind of left working class people, regardless of their race, gender, ethnicity, sexual preference, you pick it, they've kind of forgotten. And that's why it's such a big push for kind of these populist economic policies to look to put the lens is not just America first, but American citizens first. And it goes with tax policy. It goes with tariffs. It goes with bringing manufacturing jobs back. It's nationalistic in the fact that not isolationist, but understanding that we got to make it right for American citizens, and particularly for the greatest resource we've had or ever had, which is the American working man and woman. So it's to push every decision as down low as possible and to get everything back to a grassroots level. And one of the keys to populism and kind of about the sovereign will is that the use of human agency, that just don't sit there and say, somebody else has got, a congressman's got to do something, or a senator's got to do something, or governor's got to do something. You have to use your agency only. And I see this in the Democratic Party now, the people saying, do something. I think that's a lesson that we learned after President Trump, and look, we disagree on this, but President Trump won the 2020 election, and we were kind of shattered as a movement.
He came right out and said it. Good. Well, you're allowed to say that on YouTube now that time has passed. I also believe that the Democrats, after describing Trump as the second coming of Hitler in 2020 and in 2024, wouldn't have gone out of their way to ensure that he ended up on the losing end. However, they managed to do so and justify it based on the propaganda that was inputted into people's minds that did the dirty work for them.
Movement. He left Washington, D.C., and we had to go back to basics to say, it can't be somebody else do something. We had to do something. And that's where we went back to really a pure populist movement to go at the grassroots, the precinct strategy, and kind of rebuild ourselves from there.
Well, and I appreciate the notion of agency, that we're not bystanders in the world. It's decisions, not conditions, that determine our fate and future. And
and your decisions in California have been absolutely abhorrent, which is why I vehemently oppose you being in charge of the United States. Just because you're slick and good looking does not qualify you as such.
Fundamental notion of agency, I think, is important more broadly. And I think that goes to some of the issues around, victimization. And I see a lot of that, respectively, on the right increasingly, even with Trump often approaching.
I keep saying because it's like that's exactly what you guys have been doing. Nothing but nonstop victimhood. The left revels in it. It elevates one's status amongst that segment of society, the evil part of society, I mean.
That sort of mindset.
What do you mean? What do you mean for Trump?
I think there's sort of the grievance narrative that comes from Trump. This notion there is sort of a victim.
Well, they did try to put him in prison for 300 years, right? They did try to bankrupt him.
Well, that's
if a guy never had
No, that's not a separate thing. Look at him laughing it off. That is not a separate issue. You go after somebody, you try to deprive them of their freedom, their livelihood, their bank account. And then you say, oh my God, he holds a grudge against us. He's playing the victim. No, they also tried to shoot at him 2 times. Yeah. Okay. And then Gavin, he's going to just deflect.
Never had a set of grievances. They did steal, according to us, and we're firm believers, the 2020 election, which I think worked out better, that providentially that he was able to come back with that gap, because I think you're seeing a much more not just new and improved, but somebody that's much more in command of these decisions and really stepping up in a way that we could have never done before. But no, I don't think it's grievances. I think it's reality. I mean, they tried to. No one in American history has the system ever come after, and I think that's one of the problems with the Democrats. You got in a position of having to defend. Remember, I come from a working class Democratic family.
Right? Kennedy Democratic family.
Kennedy Democrat. I was telling some people last night. I said, we didn't know any Republicans. We were Irish Catholic working class phone company firemen, a Navy enlisted people. You didn't know any Republicans. They just weren't in your, we were in the South also, which is, machine Democrat. You didn't know anybody. You didn't know anybody then. And so to see what President Trump had to go through and to see how we've actively changed the Republican Party to actually the working class party in this country. There was a poll done last spring that showed that we as the Republican Party are the working class party and viewed as such, and that President Trump's the leader of that working class party, and the Democrats have become both not just the Wall Street elitists, but also the kind of the credential class with the poor underneath it, of which we're now trying to obviously recruit not just the working poor, but actually the poor itself to join our broadening coalition.
I appreciate it. I want to talk more about that, because I think it's interesting, just as one of the points of contrast with you and, frankly, Trump himself right now is on some of the issues of tax policy in relationship to this notion of who are you for. And you've been pretty critical about the proposed tax, the extension of the existing tax cuts that disproportionately favor the wealthiest. And you are making the point that it should disproportionately focus on the middle class and working.
Governor, I'm not so sure. Let me get there. So in 17, I was a big advocate of that in the first Trump tax plan of actually raising the rates on the upper bracket, right, and doing actually more to the lower bracket in the corporations. And it was not just what I thought was right, but also politically expedient. At that time in the spring of 2017, it was really Bernie Sanders and Pocahontas that was going to be the
Senator
number one.
Warren.
Elizabeth Warren.
I don't think that we need a translation. Everybody knows who Pocahontas is. Elizabeth Warren, the senator who wants racial animus to reign throughout the United States. Watch this.
Race matters, and we need to say so.
So that's Pocahontas for you.
Is going to be Pocahontas, we call it, going to be the challengers coming from the populist left.
Right.
And I thought it was very important to nip that in the bud at the time and raise the brackets. Now, I think history shows that they can show you the math that doing all of that actually worked in unison and got us that great, 2019. Today, and President Trump, I think, and Bannon are pretty upfront that this is the last chance we're going to get at a supply side cut of that $4 trillion. I think the $2.6 trillion of joint, 400,000 and below of couples.
Right.
And I think you add another couple of $100 billion for maybe the pass-throughs to the LLC so the entrepreneurs get caught up. But that additional $1 trillion, unless it can be shown mathematically, and I think people are working on this, that they consume, right now, I think the top 3% consume almost 50% of what's going on in the country. Unless that you're concerned that would kick you into a major recession if that went away, I'm pretty adamant about that. You shouldn't, the upper bracket shouldn't get it, and even some of the corporations shouldn't get it if they're just going to do stock buybacks. But additional tax cuts should go as President Trump promised: no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, and particularly no tax on Social Security.
Yeah, but I mean, his current proposal doesn't add up then in that respect. Blows the deficit and continues those corporate tax cuts and continues the tax cuts to the wealthiest. So it runs. And I'm not.
I think what we're, not to be argumentative.
No, appreciate it.
We want to have an open dialogue. I think when you look at Bannon, and Charlie Gasparino had a pretty good piece in the New York Post today about this. If you add in, if you look at the growth rates, and it's predicated on growth, you look at a growth rate 2.5% to 3%, right? If you look at what we're trying to do on cutting federal spending, in addition DOGE, which is the waste, fraud, and abuse, and you look at additional revenues externally from tariffs, you can get to, and what Besson's trying to do is take the deficit from 6.5% of GDP down to 3.5% of GDP. So this not this out of control explosion of $2 trillion in deficits, which we as Republicans are about to sign off on today. Just so your audience understands, this CR today, the House will approve the Biden-Kamala Harris spending for this year.
Locking it in.
They're locking it in, and that's a tough one.
How are you out there supporting that then?
Well, because right now, I think with everything it does, and by the way, it's that, plus it's a $2 trillion deficit. Okay? I think the reason we're doing it is that the House has not gotten their act together to get these single subject appropriations bills done. They are committed to do that, working with Democrats in the spring and summer this year for fiscal year 26. And I think to keep.
This is the problem with the federal government, is that once something becomes implemented and passed by Congress, it's very, very, very difficult to roll back. So everything that Elon Musk is doing at DOGE is being threatened by the fact that Donald Trump believes that he needs a smooth economy, as Steve Bannon right now is describing running and humming, and thus the cuts that Elon is making are at peril.
To keep the government open, to keep President Trump hitting on all cylinders, to keep DOGE at work in federal court overnight. The federal courts are coming after DOGE. This is on at least information. We expect many more lawsuits about that. Yep. But I think in the effort to do it, we're prepared. And we hate any CR. This one we've hated for a long time. We're prepared to go along. The president says he needs it. What I love about Johnson for the first time, they just announced they're going to vote on it this afternoon. He thinks he's got the votes in the House to do it. Then they're going on recess. They're sending it over to the Democratic Senate with a play me or trade me.
Which then they need 7 votes on the Senate side in order to get this done. Otherwise, we got a government shutdown, yet another one. What is your over-under on the prospects of that?
I think it's interesting. I think the Democrats have to make a decision of whether they think it's better to keep it going and keep the resistance they've got in the legislative part, but also in the courts, or let Elon Musk, potentially unchain him with the DOGE groups on who's who's a necessary employee versus who's an unnecessary employee. I think it's the first time, because traditionally the Democrats have always been for keeping the government open.
Yeah.
I think they put them in a real quandary, and I think this is Johnson's. It's going to be high stakes poker, I think, this afternoon. But people should understand this is a.
For the record, the Democrats folded with Chuck Schumer announcing that they would no longer resist the CR and will keep the government open. Of course, the hypocrite Democrats went through all sorts of machinations when the Republicans threatened to do so, and thus had to eventually face the fact that they would be viewed as hypocrites. But they don't really care. It was something else. They're viewed as hypocrites by everybody.
Big pill to swallow for us, because we have argued. This is the whole reason Kevin McCarthy, a guy you know very well from California,
Sure.
we got turfed out as speaker.
Yep.
It was all over. It was the deal he cut with Biden that gave President Biden 2 years and unlimited, no debt ceiling to spend and run up. And McCarthy then didn't deliver on the single subject appropriations bills, and he got turfed out. So your audience understand these are huge fights on our side of the football all the time about spending.
So it's, so locking in the Biden era budget, or at least extending it and kicking it out, it's the last thing I expected to see coming from, your side of the aisle, or at least the MAGA movement, but also just even you saying something complimentary about Speaker Johnson. You've been pretty critical of
I've been
the
very
speaker.
critical. I've been very, up until today, I've been very critical about, we're in this job because of overpromising and underperforming. And I think you got to, in leadership, I think now, and I think it's a long way from him being out of the woods, is that now, because he's got 6 months now, he's got to deliver like a real budget with real cuts. Because just back for your audience, the DOGE effort is waste, fraud, and abuse. Okay, they're kind of like shock troops or special forces, and people can either say they're great or whatever. I would like to see a little more definition of what they've actually found. Okay,
that would be all of us would. A little bit accountability, transparency. I agree with that.
More transparency, but I think, that doesn't, to me, get to the meat of it, because I think you're going to have programmatic cuts, and I've been a big proponent that those programmatic cuts have to start in the Defense Department. I was a naval officer for 8 years. My daughter went to West Point. I'm not a dove, but I think I've been a big critic of we're at $1 trillion now, and that's one of the reasons of this post-war international rules-based order. We just can't continue on with NATO. We got to have allies that really pitch in here. But you got to start in the Defense Department. You have to do programs and billets to get the budget deficit to 3.5% of GDP, roughly under $1 trillion, so that we can start. So somehow we can begin to finance this, because right now that's the driver of inflation. Biden, they just restated their numbers.
The driver of inflation is always government, the printing of money. It is a hidden tax on the consumer, as you find that your savings are being debased, devalued as they print more money. It's just the easiest way to tax people, to pay for your errors as a government.
Fourth quarter. And traditionally, the Biden thing has always been, the labor number has always been different, right? It's been, one thing, and we've criticized that for a long time. This one, the shocker. And I don't think that, and I've said this, that the guys on the economic team did enough for President Trump of pushing this. The inflation number went from 2.2% to 4.2%. And it really didn't even get mentioned in the business press. And I said, that shows you the underlying kind of burning inflation. And the reason that is you have to finance now essentially a third of the debt every year. So you're talking, I don't know, $10, $12 trillion of government securities you have to sell at higher interest rates. That's what's driving inflation. Plus, I think a too loose Federal Reserve. So you had both a fiscal overspending and a monetary loose money. We've got an inflation problem that's not going to be easily solved. The way to solve inflation is you have to cut, I believe, federal spending dramatically. You have a Keynesian kind of stimulus all the time, and you have to do it. And that's going to lead to painful conversations. It just is, because if DOGE doesn't find all this waste, fraud, and abuse, right? And they're saying now they
found it. The question is whether or not it can be cut.
Think they can get $1 trillion, which would cut the deficit in half.
Yeah, you can't get $1 trillion, back to your point, without significant programmatic cuts. And I appreciate the defense frame, which is anathema. I mean, the CR increases the defense spending and locks in a higher rate. But you can't get there without cuts to something that you, to your credit, have said, you can't put a quote unquote meat
Look,
axe towards the Medicaid side.
I came out of the Pentagon, and this is why I was adamant about Elon Musk, what we call crossing the Potomac. There was a point in time that people were saying, well, let Pete Hegseth handle the Pentagon. Elon, I said, no. If you're going to get first off, waste, fraud, and abuse, I think everybody has to
Everyone's
get
for
assessment.
that. Everyone's
and
for
not just that, the Pentagon.
Not everybody. People want the federal government humming in terms of giving out and doling out all government contracts for fake work, which have taken place at a frequent basis, or handing over $2 billion to a recently created NGO run by Stacey Abrams, $2 billion. Before that, it had raised a total of $100. So there are many people that don't want to get rid of the waste, fraud, and abuse because it's easy money in their pockets, which is why the whole media apparatus run by the Democrats is going all in against Elon Musk and trying to portray him as a Nazi and trying to inflict as much pain on him as possible, because follow the money. That's where it always goes. You just follow the trail of breadcrumbs to where the money is being doled out.
It's got to step up. People have to know that if because it's always rumored, they can't pass an audit. It's $2 trillion of assets.
$2 trillion just for the damn F-35, which we could get into that
programmatically,
question.
but there's $2 trillion on the audit. I think there's $2 trillion of assets they can't put their hands on.
Yeah.
John Stewart was just lighting up one of the undersecretaries of defense, I think, a couple of weeks ago about this.
Yeah.
So you have to do that, but then programmatically, and this is why I think President Trump's the shift to hemispheric defense, which is from Greenland to the Panama Canal, more of a naval strategy. In the Pacific, it's the 3 island chains, and really the vast desert of the Pacific is really the American heartland. That's our defensive barrier. That, to me, should restructure the entire Pentagon and armed forces to force structure around that. I think Pete Hegseth's got to move immediately. I think there should be significant cuts to the Defense Department, and then that would give you the political cover to then say on Medicaid, we got to be sensible here. Right now with the economic distress, there's a lot of MAGA on Medicaid. A lot of MAGA
and
on
overwhelming
Medicaid.
Opposition to cutting it from Republicans.
And I think by the illegal aliens and obviously the waste, fraud, and abuse, and some of the things about a block granting it back to a governor like yourself in California. To figure it out has to happen, and other social programs. This is not going to be painless. We've been so out of control, and it's both parties.
All true.
The Republican Party's been controlled opposition. They have not had these tough fights.
No, that's right.
That's the tough fights we're going to have.
I mean, and to be fair, so people understand, and it's not an indictment to your point about both parties, but another $8.4 trillion went to the debt under Trump administration. And to be fair, COVID had a huge part of that, but it's $3 trillion even before COVID hit. To your point. And I remember talking, by the way, you'll appreciate this, Steve. I remember being in Marine One talking to President Trump, about the issue of the deficit. And he literally looks at me and he goes like this with his hands. And he said, printing press, and literally dismissed it.
He was kidding.
Well, I'm not the way he governed the first 4 years. I'm not sure he was.
By the way, the first couple of years, the deficits were under, I think, $400 or $500 billion. We came very close to actually trying to balance it. If we went back to pre-COVID spending, I mean, Scott Besson says this all the time. We don't have a revenue problem. And this is for everybody would think about having to increase your taxes. We have a spending problem. I mean, post-COVID, we've had explosion of some of these.
100%. You just have to rein in the spending. The federal government will spend whatever you give them. So stop asking us for money and start learning how to cut.
Programs, I think you got to get your arms around them. But once again, these are going to be huge fights and they're not going to be painless. What I liked about Johnson today for the first time, because I think he's tapped us along and overpromised, and now we're in a situation that, we have to do a CR, which we hate. If you think that the MAGA base and our show, we represent the hardest core of the hardcore.
Yep.
If you think we like sitting here and basically not lighting up the phones and accepting Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's budgets, it's a tough pill to. And
it's a hell of a thing. I mean, I'm enjoying watching this in some respects.
No, but what I liked about him, he's voting and going home. He's going to put it right on the Democrats about shutting down the government or not. And I think you're going to have a real firestorm in the Senate, and I think a fascinating debate about the direction of the country. And I think we're going to see that. I think we're going to see that coming. I think you'll see voices like Fetterman and others start to step up and take a much more prominent role in Democratic Party. Because one thing I keep saying all the time, if you'd watch MSNBC and CNN, you never really see the populists on the economic side. Right. You don't see the Ro Kahanas getting the time. You don't see Fetterman really getting the time. Sherrod Brown and Sherrod didn't want to do national TV, but you never see really the economic populist ever really get, they kind of roll out Bernie Sanders, who I'm not a fan of, but they don't really ever get to the other guys. I think that's all going to become quite different in the days and weeks ahead.
Well, I think, Steve, just, listening, those of you that may have some familiarity to you, but never have taken the time to actually listen to you or tune into the war room. I mean, the idea that you're even talking about the corporate tax rate and the tax rate for the wealthiest among us, and having, the fact that we're having this dialogue about your different approach. I mean, in some ways, it's the California tax policy as it relates to more progressive tax policy that favors the working class. We would never
take anything from California.
I understand. I'm challenging you on the point. But
first off, you're grossly overtaxed in California. We want to cut taxes.
We have moderate income taxes for middle class working folks. It's the top.
No, it's an extra 10%. I know because I paid it. And then you have the highest gas taxes, the pretty high property taxes, not the highest in the nation, but that does not necessarily apply to middle class people because it's very difficult to afford a house or a condo in California on a middle class salary. Nevertheless, you go to neighboring Nevada, there's a 0% income tax, which is part of the reason that we left, in addition to the fact that you've destroyed the state with homelessness and enabling them, not to mention all the crime that's popped up.
Tax rate, which you're arguing for a little higher tax rate, which I appreciate, in the corporate tax side.
No, he's not.
I don't know if it's completely dissimilar. I don't want to get you in trouble. But on the issue of tariffs,
it's a bad reframe.
So I want to go back to that because you're a big supporter of tariffs. I mean, right now, this tit for tat, what's going on in Ontario, we doubled another 25% back to aluminum and steel. Up in Canada, we're already seeing the.
I think we're increasing aluminum and steel. I think he said today 100%.
Is it going 100? It was 20.
There was
another
truth. I think it was a true social. Not that it's tit for tat, but there was a true social right before I came on.
By the way, I think there were 100, literally 100 true social posts. And with respect on tariff policy, it seems a little chaotic. There's no stability. The markets are reflecting that. I used to say the most powerful force in the world was Mother Nature. Now I say the markets. I mean, people. Now you're seeing even.
Well, I will
Trump
tell you,
session. You're seeing the sort of Trump slump.
I say
a lot
this:
of stress.
the bond market more than the stock market. The bond market has turfed out more governments than howitzers. If you look over the last couple of years, Liz Truss in England, really the Assembly in France under Macron, the Germans. Right, the Italians are probably close to a sovereign debt crisis. Spain, England's been a couple of governments, even Starmer's under real pressure. So no, the global capital markets, particularly when you have to borrow this much money, the 10-year Treasury is, Bob Rubin used to run the country under Clinton, and this is why Carville said, "I want to come back as the 10-year bond or the bond market." Those set that 10-year bond sets everybody's economic underpinnings. And so it's very important. But I think with President Trump, it's both a growth strategy and part of his tariffs. Governor, it shouldn't be lost that the tariffs have many different aspects to it. Number one, he wants to get back, at least somehow, back to more of the American plan from Alexander Hamilton and McKinley. Before the early 1900s, driven by the earthquake in San Francisco and the fire, we had a massive financial panic. And that led to really the Internal Revenue Service and people focusing more on getting off American domiciled companies and American citizens. President Trump wants to go back to more external revenue. That's part of the tariffs. He looks at the U.S. as a premium market. And so you would pay a premium to get access to here like you would get a skybox at a sporting event or sit in the front row of a concert. And he's got an out. If you want an out, because the tariffs are going to be substantial, right? Particularly in Mexico and Canada, so you can't game the system manufacturing wise, and against China. Just look over the last, he's been there 40 days. I think over the last 3 or 4 weeks, you've had almost $1 trillion. I think it's $800 billion from Honda, from Siemens, from Apple. It was $500 billion. Taiwan Semiconductor. With $100 billion in 4 years. These are massive capital investments in top grade. This is not some sovereign wealth fund saying I'm going to come in, or it's not Masasan, it's SoftBank saying I'm going to throw $100 billion. These are companies that are relocating here. And a big part of that is the tariffs. They say, look, we want to get into the United States. We want to manufacture domestically. It's got a logistics supply chain we can control. It's got, it's got the rule of law. but most importantly, doesn't have tariffs and it's got lower energy costs. That's the new economic model, and it's going to go through some choppy water to get there. So these are just not a 25% tariff on an avocado coming from Mexico or some part under the hood from Canada. It's much more systematic. Now, I understand the way it was rolled out, because of the emergency nature of it, the focus was on fentanyl and this chemical warfare.
Yeah, which is a little BS, isn't it? I mean, there's a larger economic populism frame here. Let's just be honest with folks. It had nothing to do with the tyrannical nature of Prime Minister or 51st governor of America, Justin Trudeau's policies on the border.
But hold it. The Canadians have been. The Canadians are one of the tough. This is why when you talk about reciprocity on April 2nd, you're going to have reciprocity and tariffs. And in India and Canada,
you think that's going to go in effect in April? With all the uncertainty, the market uncertainty, the Trump slump, all of the stress and the anxiety that people
note the way that they frame it, the Trump slump. This is necessary because if you have one trading partner that says we're going to tax you at 200%, as for example Canada does with dairy products going into their country, and we allow Canadian producers to sell at the 0% here, where do you think that the trade balance is going to go? And is it based on purely fair competition, or the fact that Canada is basically excluding U.S. dairy producers from selling their goods in Canada? That becomes the question. So why not develop trade reciprocity? And if you want to lower your tariffs, we will too.
Or feeling all the
I don't
doubt.
call it the Trump slump. Listen,
I know others.
Again, Warren Buffett, who's a big Democrat and a supporter of many Democratic politicians, because you know him very well.
Yeah.
He went to cash. He's sitting on $350 billion in cash a couple months ago. I think he realized that a lot of the market, particularly equity markets, were driven by NVIDIA and all this AI first kind of stage. Sure. There was a lot of fluff in that. So I think with President Trump, I do think they're coming in, because I think he's changing the geostrategic model of the United States back to a hemispheric defense, away from the post-war international rules-based order, which has really gutted the United States. It was great for a while. Right, it was great for
80 years of relative peace and prosperity, and America dominated. There's a lot of attributes.
But it gutted the middle class. Remember, and the working class. And at the end of the day, we had allies that were taking advantage of it. Give me a second on this. If you take the rim of the Eurasian landmass, you got Western Europe, the Persian Gulf, the Gulf Emirates, Middle East. Then you've got the Straits of Malacca, the South China Sea, and then up to Korea and Japan. Those four nodes, we have commercial relationships, trade deals, capital markets integration, some cultural interface, but it's it's an American security guarantee. This is how, whether it's NATO or the Middle East or South China Sea or up with Japan and Korea, we have combat troops there. We have 150,000 troops deployed today in, I think, 115 countries. This is one of the reasons people talk about foreign aid with USAID, which I'm against a lot of this stuff going on, but it pales in comparison to what we're underwriting for countries that were upside down on every trade deal. Our trade deficit I think in January alone was a record trade deficit. I think it was $100 billion.
Yep.
So not just do we have budget deficits, we have trade deficits that are kind of inextricably linked, because we've gutted all the manufacturing jobs. We've offshored those. Right. And I think Trump's geoeconomic strategy is a massive reshoring process. And I think you're seeing this now. And I might note, and I don't want to take a cheap shot, a lot of those traditionally would go back to California, but they're going to Arizona and Texas, because I think they're looking at red states now as having lower regulation, lower taxes, and people are going there. And I think this is going to change the demographic change in the United States as you have Trump's reshoring come back to the United States.
Well, and so, to be fair, I think
that's tied to unwinding the post-war international rules-based order. We're going to tell people that, hey, we're not going to be everywhere. Kids from California are not going to be on carrier battle groups. Guys deployed from San Diego and kids that live in the Inland Empire are not going to be deployed in the Red Sea with two carrier battle groups that keep the Suez Canal open so that Europe can get energy resources from the Persian Gulf. I think those days are kind of over. We'll pick and choose as we pull back and look at hemispheric defense, not retreat from the world, not be isolationists, but kind of take care of the homeland first, and particularly take care of the people in the homeland, the working class and middle class.
No, I appreciate how you laid all that out. I think there's risk in the context of the argument to move into a multipolar world, and obviously the security umbrellas that will radically reorganize themselves. You're already seeing that with Merz in Germany in the relationship with obviously Britain and France, but also I worry about Japan and South Korea in that relationship. I worry about the nature of our broader influence. But I want to step back. There was a lot that influenced a lot of those companies you said that are coming back to the United States of America. Do you not agree that the industrial policies of the Biden administration as it relates to the infrastructure bill, aspects of the IRA, aspects of the CHIPS and Science Act, were they not determinative from an industrial worker-centered policy perspective? Were they not also influential in the decision for people to begin to quote unquote reshore or make unprecedented investments?
They might have been at the beginning, but it was President Trump. They announced during President Trump's term. If President Trump had not won this election, and you just had Kamala Harris.
You don't think those companies?
No,
I mean,
I do
there
not.
were records, but there was.
I 100% agree with Steve Bannon here. There's no chance that these companies are going to come back to America that just wants to find a way to hit that pinata and take the money from them, similar to what the EU does. But that's the Democrat administration that would have taken place under Kamala.
Investments in coming back during the Biden years.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I think Biden in the entire 4 years was $1.7 trillion of capital investment back here from, I think, companies, not just private equity.
From the private sector.
From the private sector, right? Not just, but Trump's almost at $1 trillion in 4 weeks. And these are Apple, because they understand that Trump represents a populist nationalist that's only growing and only going to expand, right? And people are now focused on this. And that's why I think you have Honda, you have Siemens, you have, the semiconductor company is huge. You know, they're the most advanced, I would say, semiconductor manufacturer in the world. The other thing he's
talking about TMC from Taiwan that is now going to build a plant here.
I think it's quite interesting that traditionally our tech area in 128 in Boston and Silicon Valley are built around great engineering schools. They're built around Berkeley and Stanford, or built around Harvard and MIT. You know, when you start relocating to Arizona on something that's both an art and a science, like advanced chip design. And, you know, I love Mike Crow at Arizona State. He's a buddy of mine. University of Arizona is a great school. I love Arizona. They're not exactly MIT or Stanford. And I think it's showing you that the red states have done such a great job, Texas being the lead, of actually making these amenable to people's needs as companies, that they're coming back there. And I think it's going to have a huge political impact and a huge demographic. But they didn't come in Biden, Harris. And if Kamala Harris won, certainly they wouldn't have come, because she's still a globalist that's not prepared to disrupt the global supply chains. President Trump's prepared to do that, because reshoring, they're not going to come back here unless you incentivize them to come back here. And part of that's a carrot, which is what
well, that was what the IRA was. That's what the infrastructure, chips and science,
but
$52
as
billion.
you know, Trump's better with a stick, and you need a carrot and a stick.
But don't those same, and I appreciate the stick, but let's talk about those red states. Aren't they disproportionate, the ones impacted by these tariffs? I mean, to your point, there's going to be some tears here. And I appreciate the larger geopolitical and what you're trying to argue for ultimately coming out on the other side. But this transition is not overnight. The transition will come at real cost and consequence. Let's just be pragmatic. Up in Minnesota, Michigan, in New York, they're looking at $100 more a month on electricity bills as it relates to the retaliatory nature of what happened.
That's a threat. That's if it goes through some.
But that's just one example. I mean, every economist looks at the impacts of these tariffs.
But
obviously, California will be disproportionately impacted.
We did this, Governor. We did the most significant tariffs we've ever done on the Chinese Communist Party in President Trump's first term. And
Biden held the line on a lot of those tariffs.
He definitely held the line. Well, number one, because I think geopolitically he realized that, you know, you've got to stand up to the CCP. And I think, although you wouldn't have heard it from the media, that what President Trump did was a beginning stage of something that had to be done to get the attention of the Chinese Communist Party, that you just can't continue to game the system. And President Trump went out of his way. By May of 19, Lighthizer and Navarro had that deal that went to every 7 of the categories they had to resolve to really integrate with the Western economy, or really the world's economy, including the state-owned industries, and they just tore the deal up and walked away, right? And said, screw you. And so that's when these tariffs, and the tariffs didn't increase prices. So when people say they increase prices, I don't actually think, you have some economists saying theoretically, but when we look at practically, back to the golden year of 2019, you don't actually see it. And I think there may be some dislocations in the short term, but in the intermediate term, I think it's really the way you get to the sunlit uplands of really having back to the American plan of, remember, world-class industrial manufacturing that generates so many other opportunities.
I think it's a mutual goal for all of us. But industrial policy, which I think is missing a little bit from the Trump agenda, with targeted tariffs, I understand, but broad tariffs without an industrial policy to back it up is where I start to lose a little.
The key is broad sustain. If you have broad and sustained tariffs, and people can make capital allocation decisions, particularly small and medium manufacturers. Remember, in the Chicago area, I think between 1998 and 2005, we lost 5,000 small manufacturers and a couple of million jobs because we shipped it all to China. And those guys are begging all the time. These are not the Apples, and it's not the Taiwan manufacturing, some country manufacturing. These are small, those companies employ under 100 people, which I think is the lifeblood. In fact, there's a guy in Laguna Beach, John Gardner, who's kind of the leader of this effort to bring the small manufacturing folks back to more craftsmanship type of manufacturing. We have to do that. We have to become a manufacturing powerhouse again. We have to do it quickly. And it's going to. Wall Street's not going to love it because they're all neoliberal neocons. They want to be invading everywhere, and they hate pop.
The question is, as a country, we have to be able to set ourselves up so that we can survive if China decides to stop shipping goods to us. For example, if there's a war in Taiwan, they might say, well, we're going to limit exports to you, and we are going to take away these vital necessities such as antibiotics, which are largely produced in China. So what Donald Trump wants to do is onshore that back to America. And in order to do so, he has to incentivize people to bring their manufacturing back here. And also, as Steve Bannon said, use the carrot and the stick. So that was the carrot, and the stick is tariffs. We are going to make it prohibitively expensive for you to manufacture abroad, thus incentivizing overall these companies to bring manufacturing back to America and making us stronger. And yes, it's going to cost us economically some, because the cost of producing things here are elevated compared to other locales around the world, which is why they're being currently produced there. But overall, in terms of the health ongoing for America and being able to plan for a nation for external events that may or may not be able to be predicted, that makes us stronger overall. So it's worth the trade-off.
One of the reasons people should understand is the blowback among the donor class in Wall Street is not just that they perceive the economics and not to their benefit, because you've concentrated wealth so dramatically here since the financial crash of 2008, but they hate the fact, and this shows you the Democratic Party. Remember, they hate the fact that they're empowering the populist. If we start to win on these tariffs, if we start to win on bringing these back, our movement is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Remember, we got 39% of African American men. I think first time we've got majority or near majority of Hispanics, because working class people see the opportunities there. And Wall Street understands this, and the corporatists understand this. I can't. Corporate America is my enemy. Number one, they're the leader in the woke movement in this country, but they're also, the greed and avarice has always been for the leaders. In fact, the tax cuts they take, and one of the reasons I hate allowing them to do stock buybacks is they game the system to drive up stock prices, to drive the warrant package and the thing, and they don't put in capital equipment.
Thank you.
To me, if you put,
page, you got to tell your president.
The difference is what stock buybacks are. They are a way to distribute profits back to the shareholders by reducing the number of shares, thus giving you greater percentage ownership of the company without paying taxes. That's what Steve Bannon fails to say. There's nothing wrong with stock buybacks versus dividending it out where everybody will pay taxes.
Steve, you got to tell your president that.
The president
to extend the status quo.
The president knows it's already his tax.
Why does he go after the carried interest?
No,
why is he going after corporate subsidies?
I'm
big
going
oil.
to break some news here, Governor. I believe that one of the leading things you're going to see in President Trump's tax bill when it comes out, that he's going to take on carried interest. And President Trump has finally had a bill.
That's my kind of DOGE. That's $1.3 billion, small ball, but it's symbolic and substantive. What about the $3 billion in oil and gas subsidies? I mean, that's ultimate corporate welfare.
They're not touching that. That was Steve Bannon's expression there.
What do you mean? We got to drill, baby, drill. We need to get.
We're already we are 13.5 billion barrels, million barrels a day.
We have to have lower energy costs. And one of the reasons all these companies are coming back. What we got to do is stop. Look, you see this in Germany. Germany had this maniacal, and you and I are not going to agree on this or even close, but they had this fetish.
Did you hear that laugh that Gavin Newsom just made? It's just this is just something that's programmed in him. It's a way of attempting to ingratiate himself to whatever the person's going to say next and allow him to go on. I find it very off-putting personally.
Well, they made a mistake on the
net carbon zero. They've deindustrialized themselves on the Greta Thunberg model. They're at 3 and 5% negative.
It was pre-Greta Thunberg. She wasn't even born, but I appreciate your frame.
No, but they're deindustrializing Germany. We don't want that to happen here in the United States.
No, we're on the same page on that. It's just how we achieve the goal. And by the way, 100% aligned on industrial policy, bringing manufacturing back that's worker-centered, 100%. By the way, I say that as governor of the largest manufacturing state in America, a state that has more corporate headquarters, God bless, forgive me, than any other state in America, more than we've had in over a decade, and that dominates in the innovative space in terms of scientists, engineers, researchers.
Hang on. You've allowed, but hang on a second. Hang on a second. You've also allowed, you've also allowed the oligarchy of Silicon Valley.
Well, let's talk about
Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is an apartheid state.
Right.
Okay. Within you're one of the most progressive leaders in this country, right? We disagree probably on everything on the cultural side, but you're one of the leaders. You're one of the leaders. Elected officials of the most progressive state, and you're the leader of that element of the Democratic Party.
See, he's putting him in that frame, so the viewers must see Gavin in the frame of being the leader of the progressives, and this is very good work by Bannon. Again, I'm not a fan of Gavin Newsom, so I left the state in part because of him, as I said earlier, and I don't want to see him elected president. Absolutely not.
And you call it techno-feudalism. Techno-feudalism. What do you mean by that exactly?
Well, here's what I mean is that two things happened around 2008 to 2010.
And by the way, that's sort of the teapot, that's the Wall Street, the bailout.
Well, the bailout, the financial crash of 2008. And this is why I consider President Obama kind of a tragic figure, right? He came in as an anti-war populist, right. And I am opposed to the war in Iraq and in Afghanistan. My daughter served after West Point in Iraq, and I can tell you as a parent, you realize that you have no control over anything when your kid goes over for defending their country, representing their country. It's you understand how insignificant you are, but the financial crash. Geithner and Bernanke went to a classic Wall Street bailout. We didn't let capitalism. Goldman Sachs got bailed out. AIG. No corporate guys ever went to prison on the worst bailout. We had the greatest concentration of wealth until the pandemic happened with the 1%, because the Federal Reserve's balance sheet went from $880 billion to I think 4.5. Right, and all that liquidity went to bail out real assets and corporate stocks. At the same time, with Obama, when Obama got this heads up, kind of, I think it was on Facebook at the San Francisco airport, this briefing about how social media, his weapon to take on the Clinton mafia, because he was a relatively unknown guy, taking on the most embedded political apparatus in the Democratic Party in modern history. And he took it on with using social media. That was his first thing. And there was a deal kind of made, a Faustian bargain, that we wouldn't pursue antitrust. We wouldn't pursue FTC or the Justice Department. We would allow the tech oligarchs in the age of the algorithmic age, to basically dominate and dominate in every one of these verticals, right, with no real antitrust. And what we allowed them to become the most powerful people on earth. But what proved out is that both on social media with TikTok and then with DeepSeek in the AI space, that the Faustian bargain, as a hegemon, we said, just give us the commanding heights. And that didn't happen. In fact, you could say it's kind of an utter failure, that the social media is all kind of clunky. It's very dominant, right? But it's clunky compared to TikTok. If you look at AI, and whether DeepSeek, you think it's a Chinese psyop or it's a Sputnik moment.
Well, it sure as hell it was a disruptor.
We clearly, you know, you don't hear a lot of talking about net carbon zero when this thing needs 10 times more power
on the data center side.
In the thing, because it's kind of brute force computing.
So it has resuscitated the nuclear question, which is interesting. So there's still a commitment. They haven't completely thrown out fully the commitment to low carbon green growth. But your point directionally, I understand.
Governor, they'll get there. You know, because they don't have the power, they don't have their business model. Now, for that epic fail.
It's so funny to me that the people that are most against nuclear energy, the cleanest form of energy on Earth, are the same people that are decrying CO2 emissions and demand that we use energy sources that are not consistent and thus don't give us a base load that nuclear, for example, does. But this just shows you the hypocrisy that they are engaging in, and it's partly because they want those green contracts to go out to certain companies. Nuclear was the enemy of big oil. Big oil, no doubt, had a big impact in terms of psyoping the American public in terms of not taking on nuclear. And now it's the quote-unquote green energy people that are in massive disfavor of nuclear energy. And I really hope we get over it, because the new plants that are designed, as I understand them, are much, much safer than the old ones.
They've gotten away from capitalism is about markets and profits. Okay. They are now about digital platforms and rent. They're rent seekers. And they don't believe in even open borders. These guys are techno-feudalists, that you have a digital platform, you had kind of a digital serfs that serve that. And you add it to AI and what they want to do in advanced AI of cutting out all the entry level managerial, administrative, low tech work. We're going to have a massive problem about unemployment, and they're just on their merry way. And here's what, just like the lords of easy money on Wall Street came to the Federal Reserve and the Treasury for a bailout, and no working class or middle class people, you know this, in California, got a bailout. They paid for the bailout through the taxes. Right. What's the first thing? Silicon Valley comes, the first thing they come for is, we need a new Mercury program. We need a Marshall program. We need $500 billion, and they need to turn over the Lawrence Livermore Weapons Lab in California, Sandia. We need to take control of all the national labs, and we need a $500 billion bailout because of the Sputnik moment. So they come back to the taxpayers. This is why I think these guys are very dangerous. And it's created in the Silicon Valley. And I understand at the beginning there was rationale for this, but now it's not. And it's got to be, and I think you've got to be one of the leaders of it.
No, and of course, California is.
If we're ever to get control of the oligarchs, you as governor and as, quite frankly, the leader of that wing of the party have got to work with us to say, hey, this can't go on any longer. First thing we need is Lena Khan, and we love her. You got
rid of her. So I was going to ask you. No, you had someone who was actually starting to deal with some of these issues, and then Trump threw her out.
I'm sorry, Lena Khan, I dislike with a passion. She nixed the iRobot Amazon deal for absolutely no reason other than the fact that she believed that Amazon might favor selling iRobot products over others because they would own the company. And that cost me a substantial sum of money, because iRobot right now, I just checked it, is trading at like $3.50 a share from $60 a share it was back then. Fun. Not a fan.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Governor. I don't think Lena Khan's name ever crossed the lips of Kamala Harris.
I don't recall, but
they never had her back. She's the first one to say.
No, because Reid Hoffman, founder of LinkedIn and architect and funder of the lawsuits against Donald Trump, as well as a big donor into Act Blue, which is organized against Elon, was against Lena Khan. She was beholden to her corporate donors.
That they never had her back. She's a neo-Brandeisian after Louis Brandeis, which always warned against the concentration of private power.
And also celebrated citizenship, which I appreciate. Active, not inert citizenship.
Exactly.
The most powerful office in our democracy.
He was a big believer in human agency.
Yeah.
And
back to the agency.
With Gil Slater's deputy, with Andrew Ferguson, also Mike Davis and Rachel Bovard on the outside. We want to break up. In fact, you see the suits right now in Northern Virginia and D.C. against Google. I mean, the hardcore populist wing of the MAGA movement really wants to target Silicon Valley to break them up.
And I look, I appreciate that, and you've been consistent on that for years, and obviously goes to, I imagine some of your issues with Elon, and we haven't even gotten to that. And I know that's all.
Do I have any issues?
Yeah, I know. What you called him evil, you called him a racist. You have a
parasitic,
illegal alien. I think was your exact phrase.
Oh my God, this is why I don't like Steve Bannon right there.
Your phrase, not mine. Though we may share some commonality in terms of concern about what he's doing. But that said, let me
hold it. No, hang on. Concern. You guys you loved all the oligarchs, and particularly Elon, until they flipped. And remember, all the rest of these oligarchs were all progressive Democrats until 11 p.m.
I don't know, they're progressive. I refer to them as libertarian, and I know these guys intimately, known them for decades.
So you know the danger we're dealing with.
Why doesn't Donald Trump? Why doesn't President Trump, the leader of the movement, Trumpism? Without Trump, I mean, maybe it's MAGA, it's the work you're doing in that populist base. But why isn't he pushing back? He brings someone in from Treasury, puts a Commerce Secretary that only reinforces.
What? Push back against what? Against cutting waste, fraud, and abuse from the government? This is what you want to agree with Steve Bannon that we should push back on?
At Treasury, I think you're seeing a very smart analysis about M&A and about the oligarchs. I think, look, with Gil Slater, Andrew Ferguson, I mean, these are one notch down and maybe not as well known as Lena Khan, but they're in the same school of thought of neo-Brandeisian, of this of concern about the concentration, the tremendous concentration of private power. And President Trump's working through this right now. Look, all these guys just became, their Damascene moment was 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the 5th of November when Pennsylvania was called for Trump. Once that, all of them, Zuckerberg,
then they
all these
moved.
guys, they became MAGA. Zuckerberg started growing the hair, working out, doing kung fu
Elon was
fighting.
there.
No. In fairness, Mark was doing that for a while before. I have actually a decent amount of respect for Mark, despite the fact that in the last election cycle, he funded all of the drop boxes and basically helped ensure that Joe Biden won and made in all likelihood, the cheating easier.
A little bit before, it seemed. Elon was there before, after he dumped DeSantis.
Elon, I think very smartly, this goes back to the precinct, and I give him tremendous credit. He saw the math of what we were doing as grassroots, of this precinct strategy, canvassing. He backed the play. I mean, and look, no one's ever written a $250 million check. When they
we know, I think it's more, but that's just my humble opinion.
It may be more eventually. Yeah. I think it's up to 280, but he backed it on the least sexy aspect, which is backing grassroots, going door to door, and particularly he would go up and campaign in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin.
But Steve, and forgive me, but what's his end game? I mean, I know he wants to be the first trillionaire in the world. I mean, what's his end game here?
Well, you guys.
To be left alone so that he can create and his companies can research and not be bogged down, for example, for water spilling in the middle during one of his launches. He got fined $50,000 and it wasn't possible to not have the Biden administration go after him and sue SpaceX for not hiring asylum seekers when, in fact, if he had, he would have been sued for hiring people without a green card, which is a matter of national security, it was deemed, and there were specific laws against it. So maybe he just wants to prosper and to be able to research and work in peace, and the Democrats give none because they want to control everything. So maybe that's his end game, Gavin. This is why I don't like you, because not everybody operates with the same end game as you, which is just the seeking of greater power.
You him a governor. I mean, you
by
guys. By
the way, in many respects, California did. It was our regulatory process and our subsidies to create this market. You're 100% right. I think you're right about that.
He left Canada to come to California. That was he's South
Africa. And then a big check from the federal government, from everybody watching, that backed his play early on when he was in deep need. He paid it back relatively quickly, but he's been the beneficiary of billions and billions and billions of dollars continues of subsidies.
38 loans, I think 38
Elon is a national hero. I really don't like hearing Steve Bannon denigrating him in any way.
You seriously want him to take over the Starlink, to take over the FAA and the air traffic control system?
Here's
If he could do a better job, yes.
How is that?
Here's what, listen, I laid at this concept at CPAC in 17 that it was going to be, populist economics and economic nationalism, America First national security. And the third was the deconstruction of the administrative state.
Right.
What Elon Musk has done, and I think this is the engineer, the better angels of Elon, that engineer's brain. I think it kicked in when he saw the strategy of how we actually win in building a coalition of working class people. He supported that in President Trump. I think now, and this is why I think he jumped on it, he sees that we have an apparatus, and I think you'd be the first to admit, the administrative state that's kind of anti-democratic. It's there. And I don't care if AOC or Gavin Newsom or Bernie Sanders walks into the Oval Office, President of the United States, the deep state and the apparatus is going to do what they're going to do. They're going to look at you as just passing through.
No, we refer to it in non-pejorative, but there's a clay layer of bureaucracy. And you're right, unaccountable folks making a lot of decisions. And I don't think that's wrong. But yours is a much more.
By the way, then you know what? I just had an idea. We should invite Elon, because you know these guys better. You're personal friends with these guys. Elon ought to take a California DOGE, sit down with you so you can get the ground.
We've been doing it for years.
But going.
No, you've been doing it for years. You are even more in debt than ever. You had $31 billion that went away via fraud during COVID times. This is what happens when you centralize power for government to be able to disperse massive amounts of money, is that fraud inevitably comes in, and you are spending money on illegal healthcare. There was a proposal in California to give a down payment to illegal aliens on houses of $150,000 of taxpayer money. This is so absurd what you're saying. You have nothing to do with DOGE. You don't care how the money is spent. You only want to further your political ends. And imagine that, $150,000 free healthcare that everybody else has to work for. $150,000 down payment for people that shouldn't even be in the frickin' country, and you make your state a sanctuary state. Don't give me that crap, Newsom.
Approach, Steve, is more like Rigo. We already did this, $140 billion of savings on a $1.4 trillion budget. That was real savings, and we did it the right way, not two people with people.
Yeah, and not to mention the train to the middle of nowhere, the bullet train that never got built that you spent 30-something billion on already.
400,000 positions under the Clinton administration.
Let
your
Elon
favorite family.
Let Elon come out. Let Elon come out and verify that. I think for the nation to be good and be good.
But he hasn't done that. There's a recklessness to what he's doing.
Let's go back to DOGE. What he's trying to do is get the waste, fraud, and abuse and identified. He has identified USAID, which people have been working on for years, but he's done a good job there. The other is this $20 billion in Citicorp. Where it went. I think people are going to, eventually need more details. I think he said he's going to provide more details. They just went to federal court last night. A judge ruled. I love it now,
Steve. I love that you're defending him now. By the way, he's been pretty soft on you.
Hang on. I'm not.
He hasn't attacked you back, which is interesting to me. He's marginally attacked you back. I'm curious your private thoughts on that. Why do you think he's a little scared of you, isn't he?
No, I don't think Elon's.
I think he is a little bit. That's my personal opinion.
I'm just a Mick that yells into a microphone. But Governor, no. Here's, I think it's important, and this is why I think, let's get back to why President Trump won again. You have basically working class people, middle class, and particularly lower down the chains. They've seen the bailouts on Wall Street. Yep. They've seen the oligarchs be made. They don't think they have agency in a global supply chain. They think they're just a cog in the machine. That their voice is not heard. Right? They're kind of dismissed culturally. They're considered, and I don't care if you're black, Hispanic, or white working class. It's not a race thing. It's ethnicity. You're just dismissed as not being important. Now with AI coming up, they see that even their children that went to college in that important 10 years that you get out of school, administrative, tech, managerial, are probably not going to be there, or be there in some dramatically different way than you came up and your dad came up and my dad and myself. Yep. So I think they see that in the institutions that were supposed to be there to be protective, people question, and the polling shows this categorically. And that's why a guy like Trump comes up and he says, look, in DC, not in the room, not in the deal. And I'm going to put you in the room. And people feel comfortable. That's why they love this kind of days of thunder and every day flood the zone, what President Trump is doing. And President Trump, and because you know him very well, he has a visceral connection with working class people that people in politics haven't had for generations. He just has this working class and middle class. They trust him and they believe in him. And he's designated Elon. I've got a lot of problems with Elon, and you know that. Elon knows it. But what I do admire is that he is trying to get this situation to get the waste, fraud, and abuse out. I hope it gets to $1 trillion. I'm his biggest supporter of that. I don't think we're going to get there.
No,
and
I think back to your point, that's deep programmatic cuts.
We're going
to,
good, because most government programs are completely unneeded and wasteful. Most of them, and none of them operate efficiently. Just take a look at the DMV versus your local Apple store. Which is more of a pleasure to go into? Which runs more smoothly? Where do you get better service? The DMV, of course.
People this summer, and I keep telling people, like, all these corporate CEOs that come to Mar-a-Lago and the tech bros and the oligarchs, and all of them came to the inauguration. They're all partying in their tuxedos. I said, this is all great, celebratory, but we're going to go through a firestorm. And I think part of this firestorm is not this CR. I think the CR gets kicked down. But this summer, when you start to go through the programmatic changes that you have to have, we have to get control of federal spending. If we don't, we're never going to get rid of inflation. That is going to be the acid test. When you talk about defense, you're going to have the hawks and a lot of other people in the neocons in your grill. When you talk about what has to happen to Medicaid, people have gone there. When you talk about the social programs, you talk about SNAP, you talk about these, we are about to have a national conversation that we've never had. We've never, and there's no easy alternatives. All the easy alternatives we left, a decade or a couple of decades ago. This is going to get down to say, hey, we need to get the deficit to under $1 trillion or like 3.5%. We're never going to, people should, and your audience should understand something. We will never pay off 1 penny of the face amount of the debt. As we increase this now about every 100 days of another $1 trillion,
another trillion.
It's just the interest. Right now, it's the gross interest charge, I think, is $1.4 trillion, which is the way it's got to be looked, not net, because they kind of take the interest on the bonds we sell ourselves and they net it out, which I think is unfair accounting. You got to look at the gross. Right now, it's significantly over the Defense Department. And I would tell people too, as we kind of wrap up or get close to wrap up, in the history of countries, no country's ever come back economically that its GDP, that its debt's above its GDP. And we are now at that space. In addition, no nation on national security has ever survived as a major power when the interest payments on their debt go above what they pay for national security.
Well, I don't
and $1
disagree.
trillion, we are now over our national security right now is $1 trillion, and we are, I think, at about $1.2 trillion to $1.4 trillion in interest payments alone.
Yeah,
but
Steve, that's why this tax cuts, extending the tax cuts, is reckless in this respect.
I don't agree with that. I think if you want to have Governor, we're at one point.
You don't give a junkie more money. The federal government is a junkie that goes out and spends any money that you give it on unproductive goods and means. The only thing that Gavin Newsom does in California is keep raising people's taxes. That's his solution, so that he can waste it more on the EDD, giving out $31 billion during COVID to fraudsters, or the bullet train to nowhere, all things that I mentioned earlier, or illegal healthcare. This is what they spend your money on. This is why the government needs to be cut. You take the money away from the junkie, put the junkie in jail.
By definition, that substantially increases the problem, increases the debt.
If you want to have a shot to get the 3.5–4% growth, you got to have a supply side tax cut. And by the way, for people, it's just keeping the tax cut they have today. For people,
I know that's the frame. Though you want to see it increased on corporations in the 1%.
I want to see corporations stay. I don't want to see a cut. But on the upper brackets, I don't want to see extension. I want them to go back to the old rates, and they have to pay the old rates. And then additionally, if they can't help us get this under control, I'm all for increasing taxes on the. They will have a tax increase if President Trump doesn't extend it. But then I think we'll have another tax increase. The 1%, the top 3%, because they control Washington, D.C., unless they work together with working class and middle class people to get this spending out of control and get all the corporate welfare out of this, because we hate crony capitalism and corporate welfare.
Except for oil and gas, apparently, Steve. Come on, $3 billion right there.
You've got to generate. You've got to generate lower energy costs.
There are exceptions apparently to the rule.
I got you. First off, you finally admitted for the first time the net carbon fetish
I didn't know. I would admit it. I've been pretty clear on this whole frame, but I'm not naive about it. But also, by the way, I don't know what more evidence you guys need of Mother Nature's fury than we've had in the last year. But that's another conversation.
Well, for another day.
And that's not fanaticism. That's called pragmatism.
Eventually.
If it's too cold, it's climate change. Too warm, climate change. If it snows, climate change. Rain, climate change. Everything is climate change. There's no model that's going to be able to predict the weather. It's too complex a system.
You work with Ro Khanna and Fetterman, you'll become more of a populist nationalist, and then you'll probably have a bright future.
Hey, Steve, I really enjoy this conversation. I think it's incredibly valuable, and I appreciate the spirit to which we were able to engage, and I hope we can continue the conversation, and I hope we get out of this week without any further disruptions. It's been a hell of a beginning of administration, and I appreciate your advocacy. I also appreciate that you call balls and strikes as it relates to what you're seeing with the administration. I
also think that for your audience, there's a saying that there are decades in which nothing happens and there are weeks in which decades happen. We're living in that time right now. So whatever happens this week, next week, it's going to be quite intense. We have an economy to turn around geostrategically. The beginning of the kinetic part of the Third World War has got to be stopped. So we're living history every day. And I'm just honored you had me on here, and we were able to conduct this in some level of decency.
Well, for what it's worth, I think it's a brilliant move by Gavin Newsom to have this podcast. It's going to ingratiate himself to a certain number of right-wingers that are going to see his style as being possibly accepting of them and perhaps making them consider a vote for him in the 2028 presidential race. This is the whole purpose of it. He doesn't give a darn about what the people are saying. He's just trying to figure out how he can craft his message in such a manner that he is going to appeal to a broader coalition as he moves towards the middle. So don't think that Gavin's doing this because he's a decent man. He's a weaselly, oily, lying, unctuous weasel who's absolutely taken his state, the most beautiful state in the Union, and tanked it and had people like me move away. And it's not 100% his fault, but he's a major player in this. And the progressive politics that are taking shape, wherever they go, they're just pure poison. They don't work. And we don't want that being brought to the White House ever, because we almost had that in Kamala Harris. God bless everybody out there. Thanks for listening. Not a huge fan of Steve Bannon personally. Thumb up the video and share it with a friend. Peace out.